Good afternoon, everybody. This is Greg Core from OSEP's Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division, and welcome to our second call in March. During today's call, two of our staff members, Kate Moran and Justin Arner, will share information and trends from our DMS 2.0 Cohort 1 monitoring reports. You'll probably remember that we've divided the states into 5 cohorts, and we are finishing up that first cohort and issuing those reports. So we'll be talking about trends from those reports and updated information about cohort 2 monitoring, which will be coming up very shortly. Some of the information we'll cover today includes the DMS cohorts, the phases, and supporting documents. As I said, we'll talk about trends from the cohort 1 reports. We'll talk about some of the revisions to the process, such as updated document requests, and then considerations when evaluating a state's system of general supervision. There'll be a brief portion on general analysis, and then time permitting, we will open it up for questions. We've got a action-packed hour-long session here, and there's some nice interactive features that I'm looking forward to. Before we start our formal presentation, we want to share a brief video message from OSEP Deputy Director David Cantrell. So if we can go ahead and cue that up.
The Office of Special Education Programs is dedicated to improving outcomes for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. One way we help achieve this goal is by providing free access to technical assistance and resources that can support building strong early intervention and special education programs. A key part of this work is OSEP's Results-Driven Accountability Initiative, which emphasizes a focus on both compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and improving results for children with disabilities. Strengthening a state's general supervision system is critical to RDA. And that's why OSEP released guidance to help states design and implement effective general supervision systems. These systems should consist of 8 components, which together form a cohesive approach for providing early intervention and special education. I'd like to think of our OSEP-funded technical assistance centers as a natural partner in developing improved general supervision systems. A state's general supervision system is the foundation on which the House of Opportunity is built, so that every infant, toddler, or child with a disability can reach their potential and succeed. And OSEP-funded TA centers stand ready to assist.
All right. Thanks so much. So I'm going to turn this over to Justin Arner, who will begin our presentation. Justin.
Thank you, Greg. Just like to welcome everyone. For this portion, we're going to take a look at the DMS cohorts, phases, and supporting documents. As we are finishing out our cohort 1 monitoring activities and gearing up for cohort 2, we wanted to highlight for everyone once again where all the documents and materials that you will need can be found, including our updated document requests that Kate will be discussing later today. On our IDA website, you will find under resources and resources for grantees, and then under DMS, you can expand the DMS 2.0 to find all of our protocols and supporting documents, including the monitoring schedule. We have a slide for each currently posted cohort through cohort 4. Here's cohort 1 with the months of engagement, noting the last engagement visit occurred in December of 2023. Here you can see our cohort 2 states. The engagement visits occur between August 2024 through January 2025, and both Part B and Part C visits will be occurring during the same month and often the same week. Keep in mind our engagement with programs will occur throughout the given month, but the on-site component most likely will be across the week, and coordination will occur between the Part B and Part C programs to ensure that OSEP staff participating in both activities are available. Moving to the next slide, we can see our cohort 3 states and identified months of engagement. Keeping in mind that the specific dates have not been set yet, these conversations will occur next year. The engagement visits will occur between August 2025 through January 2026. Finally, you will find those states in cohort 4 included on the website. However, their specific month for engagement will be announced in October 2024. The engagement visits will occur between August 2026 through January 2027. Cohort 5 states will be announced in October of 2024 as well. So as a reminder, our monitoring activities occur across 3 phases: discovery, engagement, and closeout. Discovery will include calls with the public and local component interviews. In addition, will involve a call with the state to provide a brief overview to the monitoring team on their state structure. OSEP will be reviewing the documents provided by the state in response to OSEP's document requests during this time as well. Engagement activities and interviews with the state will occur throughout the engagement month. The state lead and monitoring team will work in conjunction with the state in establishing a schedule for both virtual and on-site activities. Again, collaboration and coordination between Part B and Part C programs will be imperative to ensuring there are not conflicts with staff participation during this time. The closeout process will begin with OSEP working on the development of the monitoring report immediately following the engagement month, and within 120 days, depending on the complexity of the information reviewed, we'll issue a monitoring report with closeout within 1 year of the date the report is issued. So we'd just like to highlight some of the cohort monitoring reports, and you can find all the reports issued to date through these links provided here on the slide. OSEP is working on finalizing the last few monitoring reports and is also in the process of issuing state letters and closeout reports based on when the reports were issued. You can find all of the Part B monitoring reports issued to date on this slide or on the department's website. We'd also like to highlight the recently released Virginia closeout letter and targeted monitoring report, as well as the Arkansas B status letter issued on March 21st, 2024. You can see on this slide that we have closed out some of the Part C monitoring reports, or in the process of closeout for some of the other reports issued last year. For Part C, we'd like to highlight the recently released New York Part C monitoring report and the Michigan Part C closeout letter. So at this time, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kate, to discuss the updated document request.
Thank you so much, Justin. So we've included links to the 2 document requests that I'm going to talk about today. We now have a Part B document request and a Part C document request, and those are posted on our DMS website page that Justin highlighted earlier. So why are we updating the document request? Our original document request was very general, and we had heard from states and others that it was challenging to try to determine exactly what OSEP was looking for across the different components. In reviewing the document request and preparing for cohort 2, the DMSIT and the component leads reviewed and updated the documents to provide more specific examples on what OSEP might find useful. Although the document itself may appear longer, it is only in an effort to provide states with better examples and information on the type of documents OSEP needs when evaluating state systems. We also want to make sure and remind states that when monitoring, the time period of evidence that OSEP will be looking at is the previous 3 years. If you modified or change your monitoring process or activities in a given year, just let OSEP know, and we'll take that into account during our review. In addition to updating the document request content, we also split the document request into 2 separate and more specific documents, one for Part B and one for Part C. We've also included documents related to focus areas identified by the administration for evaluation. In addition to the DMS component areas, we are including documents for significant disproportionality under Part B, child find and evaluation under Part B, and discipline. I want to be clear on this call today that significant disproportionality will be a topic that teams will follow up on site with all Part B programs. For the other two focus areas, child find and evaluation and discipline, some states will have an additional focus conversation with OSEP on site with covering those topics. Again, OSEP will be reviewing the documents we receive and determining if further follow-up is needed based on that review. For Part C, our additional area of focus is related to child find. Again, you would be uploading those documents as part of your document request, and your OSEP monitoring team will let you know if there will be additional follow-up while on site. For both Part B and Part C, we may have additional focus areas such as early childhood transition or other topics that we cover in our monitoring, and your OSEP monitoring team would let you know that in advance of the engagement month. So the new document request is organized by the DMS component areas, and they both include the focus areas that I discussed on the previous slide. The document request template includes a table of contents on the very first page, and it's outlined across these component areas that we've included on the slide. In the external SharePoint site that you'll be given access to when you receive this document request, we have also included versions of this document request that has been split out into the specific component areas. If you would like a copy of that in advance, we are happy to provide that. But we thought it might be easier for teams to access that once you have gained access to that external SharePoint site. So we would have one for data and one for fiscal. We recognize that states often have multiple staff members who are working on these document requests and preparing them for uploading. So it might be easy to split that. I'll also highlight that this document request is in Word, so you can edit, modify, move things around as you see fit as well. All right, so we wanted to highlight some of the differences that you'll see between the previous version of the document request and the new version. Again, we're not asking for additional information. We just attempted to be more specific. So you can see here in this example, the previous version just generally listed a request for documents that represent your process for identifying noncompliance. In the newer version, you can see the more specific types of documents that would represent, such as the letter of notification, an example of the data or information that you might review when evaluating an LEA or EIS program or provider's compliance with IDEA. Copies of the final letter or report that you're providing to the LEA or EIS program or provider, examples of what was reviewed to determine correction, and then a final closeout letter. So previously we had said, we need examples of your monitoring from start to finish. Well, this is what we mean. Start to finish would be those pieces. In the second column there, you can see examples of things that might be included. So when we talk about data file or information reviewed, these are examples of things that we have seen in our monitoring so far that states have submitted. You may do some of these things. You may do all of the things that are listed there. It's not a requirement to have everything that is listed there. Those are just examples to get you thinking about what it is that you do during your review. Some people use checklists when they're evaluating. So if you're using a checklist, what are the pieces of evidence that support the yes or no's or the answers that are being provided there? So thinking about that. The other thing I'll highlight here is you can see it says examples for 3 LEAs or EIS programs that you have monitored in the previous 3 years. So keeping that in mind as well. I'll talk about on the next slide how there may be crossover for some of the evidence that you upload here across your monitoring. It may cross over for evidence for other areas, so that it may seem like a lot of information, but we think ultimately once you get in and you look at it and you begin to gather the information, you'll see that is not probably as overwhelming as it might seem when you look at a 25-page document. Here's a comparison of the data document request. So on here, you can see in the first column, our original version, those items have remained, but we've added in some specific requests for indicator data or types of information that you're looking at for determining compliance. So a lot of people will have data files or individual sheets, things like that. We would like to see for the indicators, the compliance indicators, what you're looking at. And so that information is included. This would be an example of something that you may have as part of your overall monitoring process, data files that cover all of this that you're evaluating when you're preparing to monitor. So you may see indicator, I think this is C1, that may have already been submitted for the integrated monitoring or your monitoring improvement evidence. And so you might have it in both places. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Justin to begin our discussion on OSEP's consideration when monitoring state systems for compliance.
Thanks, Kate. So I think we're going to try to make this section a bit more interactive. So we have a few true-false questions that we'd like to cover today. So here's our first one. Based on a common area finding or compliance from our previous monitoring, a reasonably designed general supervision system may solely rely on an LEA or EIS program's performance on SPP APR indicators. So you're going to see the statement pop up on the screen and take a few minutes for response. So the answer to the statement was false. Solely relying on an LEA's or EIS program's performance on the SPP APR indicators would not constitute a reasonably designed general supervision system. While the indicators were designed to measure important aspects of the state with compliance and performance under the IDEA, some requirements related to the fundamental rights of children with disabilities and their families are not represented in the indicators. For example, the SPP APR does not measure the extent to which children with disabilities are receiving the IDEA services on their IEPs or IFSPs, or the provision of IDEA services for children with disabilities residing in nursing homes or correctional facilities. Additionally, under Part C, the state is responsible for monitoring all EIS providers, as well as activities to implement Part C, and not just EIS programs. Okay, let's try the next one here. True or false? A state's general supervision system should be reasonably designed to ensure that the state examines data collected through its data system at regular intervals to determine LEA or EIS program or provider compliance with IDEA requirements monthly, quarterly, or annually. So it should pop up for you. So the answer to this statement is true. So states use data systems for a variety of purposes, including as a component of an effective general supervision system. At a minimum, states must have data systems to collect and report valid and reliable data under IDEA sections 616, 618, and 642. So as a part of its general supervision system, the state must also consider how it will review the information in its data system to determine compliance and reflect in its monitoring policies how that review of data will be used to identify the non-compliance. So the state should ensure that its policies do not delay the identification of non-compliance until the submission of the SPP APR data or the state's annual determination process. So additionally, states should inform LEAs or EIS programs or providers of when and how the data system is being used for the purposes of determining compliance and identifying non-compliance. So as states use their data system for the integrated monitoring activities, please reference question A3 and OSEP's 2301 memo And you may also wish to review how the data system fits into the state's general supervision system to make it most effective, ensuring compliance and improving the functional outcome and results for children with disabilities. All right, so we have one more here. True or false? The state is not permitted to use any of its IDA funds to support alternative dispute resolution activities, such as facilitated IEPs and IFSP meetings, an ombudsman's program, or etc. So the answer to this one is false. So states may use IDA funds to support alternative dispute resolution activities, also known as ADR. There is a whole host of dispute resolution processes ranging from the facilitated IEP or IFSP meetings, ombudsman's programs, or other mechanisms to support the resolution of disputes in the state. Just keep in mind the key to these alternative dispute resolution activities is that parties and assisting professionals understand and agree to the process, and that the concept of informed consent to the process permeates the ADR movement. So this time I'm going to pass it back over to Kate to discuss the general analysis.
All right, thank you, Justin. So in the next few slides, we're going to be discussing how OSEP evaluates states' documentation, specifically state rules, policies, procedures, practices, and comparing those across your state-specific documents and its consistency or inconsistency with IDA and among your own documents. So we're going to move to the next slide, and we'll put in the chat, Shoshana has put in the chat, the link to our mentee. So you can click that link or use the QR code that is on the screen here. And we're going to be answering this question. What is the difference, if any, between concluding that a state's procedures are consistent with IDEA versus concluding that a state's procedures are not inconsistent with IDEA? So this is going to, if you click that link, you'll be able to type in some answers, and I will be sharing my screen so we can begin to see your responses to that. So using that link, I see compliance with IDEA. If the state's procedures exceed IDEA, maybe that would be inconsistent. Consistent means it aligns perfectly. Maybe, maybe not. Meets the requirements or not. We would be evaluating that. If both can be true at the same time, they're not inconsistent. Ooh, I see we got a very specific one here. Consistent in full compliance, not inconsistent, not in full compliance. A lot of interesting answers. So keep popping those in. We'll circle back to some of these. And I'm going to stop sharing and send it back so we can get back to the PowerPoint a little bit and talk about what do we mean by a state's procedures are not inconsistent with IDEA. In some instances, a state may have a policy, practice, or procedure that although it differs from an IDEA regulation, it's not inconsistent fundamentally with IDEA. In many cases, IDEA is silent in relation to an established policy or regulation. And if the state's policy or regulation does not impact or limit an individual's or parent's rights related to IDEA, would be acceptable in most cases. So let's talk about an example. A state may have a procedure which would require that an LEA give a parent a copy of a prior written notice within 10 days of an IEP meeting. This would be an example of an instance whereby the state's procedure is not inconsistent because IDEA is silent on the specific number of days required to provide a copy of the prior written notice to the parent. IDEA specifies that the public agency must provide written notice to the parents of a child with a disability within a reasonable time before the public agency proposes to initiate or change the identification, evaluation, or educational placement of the child or the provision of FAPE to the child, or refuses to initiate or change the identification, evaluation, and educational placement of the child or the provision of FAPE. I may have had that twice in my notes, which I think I did. All right, so we're going to dive into this a little bit more so that hopefully it becomes clear what we're talking about when it's consistent with IDEA versus not inconsistent, that double negative. So as part of its oversight of states, OSEP focuses on both ensuring compliance with IDEA requirements and improving results and functional outcomes for all infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. To be transparent about our activities and provide states information on how to conduct your own analysis, OSEP wanted to discuss part of its document review process when analyzing compliance with IDEA. OSEP reviews state laws, rules, and regulations, your written procedures, and guidance documents, or FAQs, that have been issued. Keep in mind, any information available to the public is subject to OSEP's review. If the state has documents or resources that are out of date or not consistent with your current processes, it should be removed from your state's website. So what are the questions that OSEP is asking when we're reviewing documents? OSEP is first evaluating the consistency of information across your own materials. So comparing policies, procedures, and practices, making sure that those are all saying the same thing. And then we would be looking at how does that compare to the IDEA regulation? And when there are inconsistencies or differences, we then begin to evaluate, are they inconsistent with IDEA or are they not inconsistent? So on here, you can see some of the questions that we might be looking at. What content, if any, is inconsistent? Is there anything missing? How do those impact or potentially impact the rights of parents and children with disabilities? And, you know, children is used here, but we mean infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. Are there any procedures that could be problematic depending on how they're implemented? Are there any procedures that appear to be especially effective in protecting rights, right? So we're not only looking at what might be wrong or inconsistent, we're also looking at those best practices and those things that are leading to these great results that we're seeing. And then also, does the information from the public about their experiences with the state system raise any questions? Or again, on that positive side, are there promising practices and positives that we're hearing that we can see in our evaluation of states' practices and procedures and documents? All right, so now we're going to go through a couple of examples. So our first example, you can see on the left-hand column, the IDEA regulation. This one defines public agency and includes in the definition of a public agency, the SEA, LEA, and ESEA. So on the left, we've got the IDEA regulation. Moving over across this chart, we are looking at the state law and policy, the state's procedure, any evidence of implementation. So that evidence of implementation may be guidance documents, it may be other documents like IEPs and things like that. And then ultimately, we might come to some conclusions. So in this example, you can see clearly public agency includes a lot of different things, the SEA, the LEA, the ESEA, nonprofit, a whole list of different entities. However, across the state's documents, their law, their policy, their code, whatever you all have, your regulations, you can see that it's using the term local education agency, which is narrower than what that definition of public agency is. In their procedure, they just use LEA. In their FA or their guide to the parents, they're only using LEA. So in that instance, we would see that the state's definition is inconsistent with IDEA and is too narrow and would be limiting the rights of parents by not including all of the other entities that the definition under IDEA of public agency utilizes. All right, so now we're on to this double negative. So what are we talking about when we say a state's policy or procedure is not inconsistent? As discussed earlier, in some instances, a state may have a policy, practice, or procedure that, although it differs from the IDEA regulation, it's not inconsistent fundamentally with IDEA. If the state's policy or regulation does not impact or limit an individual or parent's rights related to IDEA, and in some instances could improve participation or inclusion, would not be found to be inconsistent with IDEA. So as you can see in this example, a state has a policy that requires its LEAs to provide a copy of the draft IEP or assessments, evaluations, or data reports to the parent 5 business days prior to the meeting. In this example, you can see that the state's documents are consistent across the state law or policy, the state's procedure, and the state's guidance document on IEP meetings. Although IDEA is silent on any timeline to provide these materials, including a timeline in this instance, does not impact or limit an individual or parent's rights and could, in fact, help with effective participation in the meeting. So the review and analysis of the state's policies, practices, and procedures, we want to make clear, is only one part of OSEP's monitoring. We wanted to highlight that today because we're talking a lot about the document request and what happens with that. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to share with you what we're looking at so that you can also, as you're uploading your documents, as you're looking at your own materials, could be conducting a similar analysis to identify any issues or questions that may pop up in OSEP's review. Remember, OSEP reviews so much during its monitoring activity. OSEP's goal is to fully understand a state system and analyze both compliance and results. And our monitoring process uses various data points and information from a variety of sources, such as many of the ones you see on here, to reach our final conclusions. So your grant applications, your SPP APR, customer service information, local conversations that we have, interviews with the public and parents, those are all incorporated into this full discussion and analysis. So even when we're talking about maybe something's inconsistent, well, if the implementation, if it's, clear to a parent on what needs to happen, is it fundamentally going to be a finding? Those are all really detailed conversations and discussions. So what we're outlining today is a way that you can generally look across IDEA regulations in the documents you have to determine whether they're compliant or whether you may have some issues. Although we've spent a good deal of time today demonstrating how OSEP analyzes rules and regulations, we hope across our many presentations on OSEP's monitoring process, we have made clear that there are lots of different types of information that we review when determining compliance and improve results in your state. We take information from the monitoring activities and triangulate the data points to confirm compliance or non-compliance. One single piece of information does not lead to a final determination or finding about the implementation of IDEA in your state. Next slide. So as we wrap up today's call, we'd like to take one final moment for you to think about, based on today's presentation or other DMS presentations we have held, what data points or information does OSEP evaluate when monitoring states to determine compliance with IDEA in their efforts to improve results? Again, you can use the QR code on the screen or go to menti.com and enter the code displayed here, 34484622. We'll give folks a few minutes to respond. I know Shoshana has put that link in the chat, and I will be sharing my screen so we can begin to see the results of your answers here. Let's see. All right, I see some codes and numbers got put in. I think somebody maybe had their autocorrect in there. So yeah, SPP APR, We're looking at significant disproportionality, process documents, timelines, data collection, policies, web postings, interviews, regulations. You guys got it. We'll pull this together and we'll send this out to everyone after in a nice little word cloud that you can keep as the things that OSEP is reviewing and thinking about when we're evaluating state systems. And then for yourselves in evaluating your local LEAs and EIS programs and providers, those may be things to consider and think about as well of how you evaluate their compliance there. So before we take questions, we have one more slide that we wanted to share, which is a video message from our deputy director, Valerie Williams, and these are also posted on our website.
Infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families deserve to have access to early intervention programs and educational experiences that reflect high expectations for their future success. That's why the Office of Special Education Programs is laser-focused on building and supporting systems to improve outcomes for children with disabilities and their families. As part of our results-driven accountability initiative, OSEP recently released guidance to help state agencies and entities improve their general supervision systems. These systems are strongest when they prioritize both compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and emphasize improved results for children with disabilities. A state's general supervision system should consist of 8 integrated components, which all work together to create a cohesive system of early intervention and special education. From monitoring that is designed to examine and evaluate local special education and early intervention programs, to technical assistance and professional development, which give our educators the tools to be successful. Each of these 8 components contribute to creating an infrastructure that supports effective early intervention and special education systems. To put an even finer point on it, a state's general supervision system is the house on which the floor of opportunity is built.
All right. Well, we would like to thank everyone for participating today. We are going to open it up for questions, and we'll answer a couple that we've already received. The first question I'm going to answer is there a child find protocol for Part C? So all of our protocols are linked again on that DMS webpage. We do have a child find Part B, and then we use the child find assessment for Part C. We will be posting our, and we also do have the child find assessment for 619. So I'd like to highlight that as well. I'm going to put these in the chat. Again, these are all on our DMS webpage, but we will be adding the final significant disproportionality protocol and discipline protocol shortly. So those will be posted shortly, and we'll let everyone know when those are up and ready for review. I will say, though, to utilize that document request is a really good way to go through the materials that you have and do an informal assessment of your system related to those. Another question we have is, will the recently released general supervision guidance be incorporated into this process? It is and has been and always will be, you know, whether it was under 0902 or 2301, that has already been incorporated into our monitoring reports and letters. The expectations that are outlined in 2301 are ones that we have held consistently over the years and are highlighting where those pop up in our evaluation. So definitely utilize that as a tool when reviewing and establishing your structure to see whether you're in compliance or not. I know that the technical assistance centers are really developing some great tools to help you align the two as well and evaluate. The next question So how is it determined which states will need to provide information about Part C child find? So for all of the focus areas for the document request process, you will be uploading the documents to support those activities. Whether we then decide to follow up with more conversation or review about those focus areas, the team will follow up with you and let you know, we want to talk more about child find when we come on site, or in some instances, hey, we need to talk about correctional facilities or residential facilities. There's lots of different topics that you might follow back up on site, but that would be determined and communicated between the monitoring team and you during that 5 months prior to your engagement period. But everyone should be gathering their documents related to, for Part B, it's significant disproportionality, discipline, and then child find and evaluation. And then for Part C, it's child find. And you'll see those clearly on the document request there. There was a question, is there a reason why there's no examples in the Part C fiscal section? I'll have to double check on that, Beth, and we'll get back to you. I think that there are documents that we have included based on the SLOR, but there is differentiation between Part B and Part C fiscal and things that are on there, but we'll double check. And if we can add some more examples in there for you, we'll add those in. Let's see. OSEP will be. Yes, so you mentioned that OSEP will be looking not only at compliance, but also best practices that states are doing. Will these commendations be shared in the state's final report so that doing so the public is aware of the good practices? So we will be sharing and updating our monitoring reports to the extent that we can to share and acknowledge the good work that is happening in states. We're also going to be collaboratively working with our OSEP funded TA centers to ensure that that information and any best practices that we see is really shared in a broader context with other states. But yes, our intent is to be including more information and acknowledgement of what we see are the good work that's happening in states. So for Part B, which fiscal areas besides subrecipient monitoring will OSEP focus on? There is a fiscal protocol posted for Part B on subrecipient monitoring. I'm not sure if this question is saying that you haven't seen it, so I'll just pop that into the chat, but I don't know, Matt, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there were any other areas that you think teams may focus on, our teams most of the time have utilized the subrecipient monitoring protocol in our review of state systems. And for Part C, we utilize the single line of responsibility protocol that we shortened to SLOR. And then for our entities, we have the fiscal management for state agencies with primary fiscal responsibilities. So I'm not sure if that answered that question. So we received a question about states being expected to provide examples of written policies and procedures. Yes, across all of the document requests, you'll see at the top, it says, please provide OSEP with a copy of your policies and procedures related to mediation. Please provide OSEP with a copy of your policies and procedures related to your fiscal monitoring process. So there are lots of examples of what those might look like on the TA site. So they have they have one I know specifically that I'm thinking of is set up around how to write out your policies and procedures related to your overall monitoring structure of your LEAs or EIS programs. The policies and procedures around some of those other components I talked about should already be approved policies and or regulations. So under Part C, all of the approved policies and procedures that we went through when IDA was updated. All right, well, please reach out to your state leads or to Matt, myself, anybody on the DMS IT. We're always available willing, ready to answer any questions, or if anything isn't clear, reach out. If you look at the document request and you have questions about a particular item, reach out. Let's talk about it. Let's look at it. So for the fiscal area, we'll take a look at that and see if we can get some more examples on there for you. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone, and enjoy your time with family if you're having that. Thanks.